Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Harris. With me is Kyle Yates, who I feel like I haven't talked to in like a year on these podcasts. You can find us on Twitter at DanHarris80 and at KyleYNFL. Yates, do you feel that way? I mean, I don't know. Has it been that long? It feels like forever.
Yeah, for sure. I think that we were talking about this on Slack yesterday. I think we haven't been doing this job for 10 years, right? It just feels like this has been the longest season, and our concept of time is just completely gone. This is a rough week, man. Baltimore-Pittsburgh game, just getting pushed back is pushing back my process, and you really don't realize this until you get into the flow of things, especially my first year writing now, right? Or here full time. You get into a rhythm and you know what needs to be done by Tuesday, you know what needs to be done by Wednesday to get your article out. You just get into this rhythm, and this game being pushed back to Tuesday, now Wednesday.
Yep.
So Garret has our guest here. I'll just
wait to spoil it.
Okay,
wait
all
to
right,
spoil it.
Yeah. He has some kids. So, and Dan, you obviously have kids. So we can talk about this. We watch Frozen 2. A lot in our house. My son loves it. And there's a line that Olaf says that says, we call this controlling what we can when things feel out of control. That's what I feel like this entire week has been like.
All right. Well, I agree. But now we just have to get into introducing the guest because you basically teed it up. Way to go. It's Garret Price from Dynasty Nerds. You can find him on Twitter at Dynasty Price. Garret, I just said the word dynasty twice in one sentence, so I'm going to take a shot in the dark here. Are you somebody who can speak intelligently about dynasty fantasy football?
Man, I sure hope so. Or I've wasted a lot of time.
Yeah.
No, that is definitely our lane. We focus mainly on all of the dynasty fantasy football stuff. So especially when it comes to rookie season, that's when we really hone in and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's our main focus at Dynasty Nerds.
All right, good. Well, we are going to be talking about Dynasty, okay? Because we've gotten a lot of feedback. We're getting to the end of the season, okay? We do 6 podcasts a week here, so, there's only so many start-sit, things like that, particularly when, as Yates aptly put it, we're not even done with the week yet. Usually we're all right, let's get into the following week. We've still got a game to go here on Wednesday, so it's a little hard to switch focus. So for our Tuesday show, we're going to switch it up a little bit going forward. Now, it's not all Dynasty, okay? If you don't play Dynasty, you do not have to tune out. But if you do play Dynasty, we're going to have your back. We're going to have everybody's back here on this show. We're going to start by recapping last night's game like we always do on the Tuesday show, and there's a lot to talk about there, both from a rest of season standpoint. We'll throw in a little Dynasty. We're going to break down the impact of the Will Fuller news that broke yesterday after we recorded our podcast and what that means for Fuller's Dynasty value, but also for the Texans for the remainder of the season. We're going to talk about some league winners for the rest of the year, guys who we think, maybe they're available on the wire, maybe they're rostered already, but guys who we think are going to have really strong finishes here to maybe carry fantasy managers to the championship. Then we are going to talk about some Dynasty. We're going to talk about the incoming class and what it looks like. We're going to talk about players whose Dynasty value has really changed this year going forward. But first, I hope you are subscribed to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/fantasypros. You could be watching us right now doing this podcast. We do live streams on Tuesday. We do live streams on Thursday. We do 2 live streams on Sunday morning. Tagged and Yates do start sit. We have videos. We video all our podcasts. We have 82,000 subscribers. It's like a movement. And I make you this promise. For every 100 new subscribers that we get from now, going into week 13, until the end of the season, I will make Yates watch one movie, and I will make him give you his review on Twitter. If you guys have followed us all season long, you know that I'm a total cinephile. And I get very upset when I realize Yates hasn't seen a lot of. I'm glad he's seen at least the kids' classics, Frozen 2. You're good there, Yates. But
yeah, for sure.
I need to get some more into it. So for every 100 subscribers that we get, I will monitor it. I'm going to make Yates watch one movie. It'll be a good one, and I'm going to make him give his little review on Twitter or something, and one tweet about how he feels about the movie. Again, youtube.com/fantasypros. Subscribe. Click the notification button. All right, let's get into it. Seahawks 23, Eagles 17 update. Do not tell DK Metcalf that he's not yet as good as Calvin Johnson, but he's getting there. Apparently, he takes offense to that. 13 targets, 10 catches, 177 yards. He did drop a touchdown, so let's at least get that out there. Guys, we know Metcalf is a top 5 wide receiver, but I will break my rule. I'll ask one Dynasty question. Garret, how many receivers would you take over Metcalf in Dynasty formats?
honestly, there's not too many at this point. And I wasn't even the biggest DK Metcalf truther coming out. And he's just proven so much that he's a perfect fit for what they're doing in Seattle. And he's just a freak of nature. I mean, the size, the speed combination, and he's really, really improved as a route runner. So there's probably, only, man, I would confidently say I would still take Devontae Adams over him. I would still take Tyreek Hill over him. And I'm a big A.J. Brown guy, so I would still take him over him. But other than that, I think that's probably it that I can say confidently.
Yates, agree?
There's only one that I would take, and he's playing in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers. Devontae Adams is the only wide receiver that I would take above DK Metcalf in Dynasty right now. You have to factor in age a little bit more in Dynasty, so DK Metcalf being a little bit younger than Tyreek Hill. And A.J. Brown, yes, of course, he's fantastic, but I don't think he's going to see nearly the same amount of passing volume that over his career that DK will. So, man, I mean, he's a stud.
Yeah, crazy. All right, let's stick with this season now for the rest of this discussion. Tyler Lockett, I think 4 catches, maybe 3 catches for 23 yards. Over his last 8 games, guys, Lockett has topped 67 yards receiving once. Now, that one time was a 200-yard game, which is kind of the rub here. They get the Giants, the Jets, Washington next. Garrett, are you blindly starting Lockett in your lineups for the rest of the season, given the fact that, more times out of not, he's really not producing?
I don't think you can at this point, and that's the most difficult part is both of these receivers, the target volume can be skewed at times, but it's clearly heavily favored in DK's direction now at this point in the season. And so when you get to playoff time, unless you are a heavy underdog, you want to make sure that you're starting guys that you can feel confident in. They're going to get me 7 to 10 targets. They're going to get a lot of receptions, specifically in PPR leagues. And you just can't say that confidently right now with Tyler Lockett. So I think he very much so has become this wide receiver 3 flex type of play at this point in the season.
Yates, that's a little bit of a hot takey for me to put him there, and I'm not actually sure I can disagree with it or find all that much to argue with. What do you think about Lockett rest of season?
Oh, yeah, it's a fair assessment. I mean, based on what he's done, and like you mentioned that stat where he's really been very inconsistent. And so the part of like dealing with fantasy football and trying to figure out is, okay, what do I want in my lineup? Do I want these big blow up performances, but they happen every once in a while? Or do I want the consistency, right? Do I want just the safe floor week in and week out and know that this player is not going to burn my lineup? I still think that you have to play Tyler Lockett, given his range of outcomes every single week, that he could absolutely just explode. There's really no telling where the ball is going to go each week in this Seattle offense. Yes, it's been going DK's way here as of late, but Tyler Lockett can absolutely explode. I think the worst thing in the world would be to get into the fantasy playoffs, sit Tyler Lockett, and then him go off for a couple of touchdowns, and you lose your matchup because of it. So I think it's one of those plays that you got to put him in. Now, you can adjust your expectations. You can downgrade him in your rankings, of course, and that makes it a little bit more of a tough decision. But yet, at the same time, I still think you got to play Tyler Lockett.
Yeah, it's out of curiosity. Where do you have him in your rest of season rankings? Ballpark, even if you don't have him
he's still in that high end wide receiver 2 range. So he's been downgraded from what we saw earlier on in the season, but yeah, he's still in that range.
I think for me the biggest thing is I agree with you. Like, I can't really disagree with what you're saying. I don't feel comfortable that Lockett's going to go out there and produce each and every week, of course, because he hasn't more often than not in recent games. At the same time, once we're kind of past the top 12 receivers in that area, I don't feel that comfortable about anybody. I think everybody can go out there and just not get it done. And so I do think that he offers essentially as high a ceiling as really anybody else who's out there. So yeah, for the most part. And Garrett, really, you basically were still like, you're rolling him out there still. I mean, you don't feel great about it, right? He's lower, but you are still rolling. It's that
flex range. It's that wide receiver 3 range. Chances are you're not deep enough to be able to say, I'm just going to outright bench him. But there are teams where you might have invested really, really heavy in wide receiver, and now you're trying to decide, okay, Tyler Lockett or Devontae Parker. It's those kind of things where it's much closer than you would have thought a month or two ago.
Yeah, it's certainly been frustrating here for managers who are rostering Lockett. Let's talk about the run game a little bit here. Chris Carson returns. He does score the touchdown. He looks pretty good when he's out there, but he was eased in a bit. Carlos Hyde saw 41 snaps. Carson just 25. Carson had 10 touches. Hyde had 18 touches. So, Garrett, it's his first game back. You understood that they might be, easing Carson back in a little bit, but Hyde has looked good the last 2 games. So is this something to be concerned about, do you think, if you're rostering Chris Carson going forward?
No, I'm not overly concerned about Carlos Hyde. For the most part, he was somewhat ineffective last night. He had one large run that was called back, but other than that, it was, he's Carlos Hyde. He does good job at picking up the blitz and different things like that. But when you're looking at somebody that's going to be able to down in, down out, really make plays for you, Chris Carson has a much higher ceiling, a much higher range of outcomes that you can get out of him, and he's just a more tenacious runner. So assuming we close our eyes and cross our fingers about the fumbles, everything else with Chris Carson, he's just a very good football player.
Yeah, do you agree with that? No real worries about Carlos Hyde here cutting into Carson's work too much going forward?
Not Carlos Hyde. The concern here is that Rashad Penny returns to practice this week. And so that's the concern, that they may be like getting into the mindset of, okay, we're going to continue to roll out a committee approach here and get back to what we saw towards the end of last year. Now, I don't think Rashad Penny's going to come out here and see, however many snaps, 18 touches and however many snaps that you said Carlos Hyde had, comparative to the 20 that Chris Carson had. I don't think it's going to be a split like that. But yet, I do think it's enough that we have to be concerned about Rashad Penny coming back into the lineup. And then what does that mean for Chris Carson heading into the fantasy playoffs? I still think that Chris Carson is a solid play each week. But yet, as far as him having that top 5 upside because of the way the offense looked earlier on in the season, I don't think that's there anymore.
Yeah, I'm not that worried about Penny just because, again, I've heard about Rashad Penny since the beginning of the season, right? I mean, sure. Pete Carroll was optimistic about him at the start of the season.
Pete Carroll's always optimistic.
He's the most optimistic human being alive, which is fine, good. It's nice to hear every once in a while. However, with that said, yeah, I mean, it's a little bit like Lockett for me, probably with a little higher floor in that I am slightly concerned here about Chris Carson because of the fact that they do have other options, and it makes sense to rotate them in. At the same time, I'm starting Chris Carson every week. So regardless of where exactly he falls in my rest of season rankings, whether it's in RB1 territory, whether it's just outside, I'm still starting him because running back stinks once you get past 15. So I'm certainly starting him, but I am a little worried, although they're leaning more into the run a little bit, which is good. And Russell Wilson, meanwhile, has not topped 248 yards passing in any of his last 3 games, just 3 total touchdowns. At one point, he was my number 1 QB rest of season, weeks ago. He is no longer. So again, this strikes me as the exact same conversation that we just had about Carson, that we just had about Lockett. But if you roster Russell Wilson, yeah, maybe you're not as confident in him as you once were, but you're still starting him every week going forward into your fantasy playoffs. Is that fair, Garrett?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. For half a second there, I thought Kyle was going to say that he was worried about DJ Dallas, which is, somewhat asinine, but would have really warmed my heart because I love DJ Dallas with a fierce passion. But it's probably a good thing he didn't say that.
Yeah, and Yates, you're fine with Russell Wilson. I mean, where is he, Yates? Did you ever have him number 1? Because early in the season, I kind of eventually moved him up.
I don't know if I had him up at number 1, but he was there. He was. If he wasn't number 1, he was number 2.
Yeah.
So I think with Wilson, it's one of those situations I'm concerned. I'm definitely concerned. In the Dynasty Nerds Invitational Dynasty League, I was facing Garrett this past week.
No, I knew this was going to get brought up.
I actually ended up sitting Russell Wilson for Derek Carr. And that didn't work out, but yet I still won the matchup, so whatever.
Well, to be fair, at least it wasn't, probably would have hurt a little more if Wilson went nuts yesterday, but
Right.
I think there are a lot of fantasy managers out there who sat good quarterback for Derek Carr this week, and I even recommended it, so my bad on that one. All right, so for the Eagles, pretty standard game here for Carson Wentz.
Word.
He looks absolutely abysmal. I mean, I really wish that our listeners and our readers could just sort of be transported into our Slack channel whenever there's a primetime Eagles game going on, Yates, with me, you, and Tags, because it's just constantly what is Carson Wentz doing? What has happened to Carson Wentz? But, somehow the guy produces for fantasy 215 yards passing. He winds up with the 2 touchdowns, of course, one of them being on that late Hail Mary. He does add 42 yards rushing. So, Garrett, what has happened to Carson Wentz? Do you think that he holds the job rest of season?
It's such a weird situation with Carson Wentz. And at this point, what kind of keeps coming into my head when I think about Carson Wentz is I think he's really gotten to the point where he's gotten this hero complex where he's seen that his offensive line has been trash. He's been missing so many different receivers during the course of the season, although they're starting to get healthier. Miles Sanders was out for a little bit. Zach Ertz was injured. And so I think because of all of those things, early on in the season, he just kind of got this concept where, all right, it's all on me. I'm about to John Wick this, and I'm going to have to take everyone out by myself. And I think that's really been to his detriment. And I just don't think he can get out of that mode now. And it looks like he's always trying to make too many things happen at once. And so I am at the point where I'm starting to get very concerned about Carson Wentz. Now, the contract that he has, I do still think he's going to be the starter for the foreseeable future. But at some point, especially because of the NFC East there's still a real shot that they can make the playoffs. And if he keeps putting up these putrid numbers and not sustaining drives and throwing interceptions, at some point they might just say, shoot, it can't be much worse with Jalen Hurts. Let's at least give him a shot. Now, I'm not convinced Jalen Hurts can do much better, but at some point you just get done. And I'm not convinced that the Eagles are that far away from that point.
Yates, there are so many things with Wentz here. Number one, it's the just general passing. Okay, like a lot of it originally for me when I was looking is the decision making. I'm looking at your Twitter feed right now, Yates. You have some good Wentz tweets going on out there, including one retweeting somebody analyzing a play where Wentz just cannot make the correct read at this point and cannot make the correct decision. But you heard the broadcast team on ESPN yesterday basically just like, okay, that throw just had way too much air. That throw, not enough air. He's just not making the right throws. What are you doing with Wentz? Yates, start for what do you think rest of season, I guess, and what it looks like, but talk about it a little bit. I'll throw it to you guys from a dynasty perspective.
It's so frustrating. Garrett mentioned it. And yeah, the tweet that you brought up there, Brian Baldinger, talking, I mean, it is a simple trips right. I mean, it's a simple read to Greg Ward. He stares him down.
Right.
He just refuses to throw the ball and then throws it backside across the formation to Miles Sanders, who's in triple coverage. Like, it's just like this. He's broken. He's legitimately broken. He can't, that's a throw that NFL quarterbacks make in their sleep. So moving forward, and it's so frustrating because you look at the final numbers. I mean, guys, Carson Wentz, yes, we have the Baltimore and Pittsburgh game left to play this week, but Carson Wentz is the quarterback 7 on the week for fantasy. And it came on the back of a freaking chuck it up in the air, and Richard Rodgers comes down with a tip ball in the end zone, right? Like, it is just so frustrating that from a fantasy perspective, you can't go anywhere near him. You cannot, you absolutely cannot go anywhere near him, especially in this past matchup against the Seattle Seahawks defense. This was a fantastic matchup that you needed to see Carson Wentz put together a solid performance to feel comfortable. Nope, didn't do it. So now I just think that we cannot go anywhere near him. This is a situation that I just want to avoid. Garrett mentioned the contract. Yes, that's absolutely correct. I think that moving forward, they cannot get away from Carson Wentz due to the contract that they gave him. It's like a $55 million cap hit. Next year, it might even be more than that, to just outright cut Carson Wentz next year. And you can't do it. You absolutely cannot do it.
All right. So we know we're starting the tight ends pretty much, at least Dallas Goedert, so long as Zach Ertz is out. And again, where tight end is, you're probably starting both of them. But other than that, I mean, your leading, receiver here when you talk about the wide receivers is Travis Fulgham with 16 yards. Alshon Jeffrey, 15 yards. Jalen Reagor, 11 yards. Your leading receiver in terms of snaps is Greg Ward. Is there any reason for redraft purposes for the rest of this season to roster any Eagles wide receiver, Garrett?
Heck no.
Yeah. We're like not even considering. I keep waiting for Travis Fulgham to basically reestablish himself. But no, and I get that they don't have the speed. Reagor, Yates, unfortunately, we've got the waiver wire live stream. You weren't on the show yesterday where Tags and I were like, I don't know, you got to pick up. We'll see what happens tonight. But you got to pick up Jalen Reagor and stuff like that. Is there any reason, Yates, to roster Reagor?
No, I did a waiver wire video for our YouTube channel, again, youtube.com/FantasyPros, and I put Jalen Reagor at 5 overall. And it was just based on the overall options on the week.
Yeah.
And I had our producer put up a note, today on that video saying, no, get him out of the top 10. You're not going anywhere near Jalen Reagor.
Yeah, he was my 5th pickup this week too, and I don't know where he is now, like 14th or something like that. Yeah, just avoid them all. It stinks. They're also, Wentz is making terrible decisions, but it also is hard because there usually isn't that much separation. I mean, Alshon Jeffrey looks like he's running in mud a little bit at this point. It's not a good situation. So, yeah, the tight end's fine. Are you any concerned, before we move on, I guess, about Miles Sanders? He didn't have, a huge – they didn't run the ball almost at all, just 22 total yards. Any concern with Miles Sanders going forward in redraft purposes, Garrett?
There's definitely concern, but it's similar to going back to when we were talking about Tyler Lockett. Running back has just been a really, really tough position to nail down. All of the injuries, guys not producing, and especially with all of the COVID stuff on top of it, where there's weeks where you don't even know if your favorite running back is going to even be able to play. So at this point, I think you have to trot him out there every week. I doubt there's a team that has 2 and 3 running backs that are significantly better than Miles Sanders. But you do it with holding your breath and crossing your fingers, because at this point, the offensive line's not good. He's dropping passes at times. His vision's been questionable, but you still have to trot him out there.
Yeah, you're going to roll him out there every time. I assume, Yates, you agree. They do get Green Bay next week, so that is something where you're like, okay, fine, I'm certainly starting him. New Orleans the week after that. I don't know. I mean, it's going to be, I'll rank him as a starter, but it certainly is going to be something a little worrisome. Yates, you agree? You just kind of still got to throw him out there.
Yeah, definitely concerned, because you're also seeing Boston Scott's snap percentage start to creep up again, and now you added Jordan Howard into this backfield. It's just it's gross, but I do think that you still got to start him as a low-end RB2, though.
Yeah, I agree. You can't get away from him. Again, running back is gross. All right, we're going to get to the Will Fuller news here in a second, but Yates, before we go on, would you like to know what was in my closet before I started at this job?
I think I know the answer to this, but yes.
I don't know if you know the exact answer to this. Here's what my closet consisted of: 5 suits, 103 separate neckties, several dress shirts and slacks, a couple of pairs of jeans, some t-shirts, 9 pairs of pajama pants, 5 hoodies, and 1 tuxedo. If our listeners would like a detailed explanation as to why those items are in my closet, you can ask me on Twitter about any single one of those items, but only if it comes with the hashtag I love Fantasy Pros. I've been married a long time. I used to wear a suit every day. I'm a skinnier version of Andre the Giant. I did not have time to find clothes that fit and look good. When you're my size, it's like finding a unicorn who speaks multiple languages and delivers the mail. It's very, very rare. But Mack Weldon came along, and I still have 9 pairs of pajama pants, but my closet looks a little more normal. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, I talked about it earlier, this half zip I'm wearing right now, this comes from Mack Weldon. It's my favorite article of clothing that I have. It was socially acceptable. I would wear it every day. I love my half zip, but there is a ton more, both that I have. Mack Weldon is your one-stop shop for men's basics with smart designs and high-quality fabrics. I also have a zip-up hooded sweatshirt, a long-sleeve t-shirt, sweatpants, really the works. And I'm going to name drop our coworker, Blaine, who lives in sweatpants and swears by them. And if I knew sweatpants were like the ones that I have right now from Mack Weldon, I would be wearing them nonstop like I do now. Mack Weldon has everything: socks, shirts, polos, underwear. It's all comfortable. It's a consistent fit. And if you do order underwear, by the way, and you don't like it, you can keep it and they will refund your money. No questions asked. I got a ton of different customized fabrics. I can keep up with you no matter what your day looks like. 18-hour silver, AirKnit X, warm knit, you name it. They've got a totally free loyalty program. Level 1 equals free shipping for life. Level 2, which you reach by spending $200, gives you 20% off every order for the next year. And if you want 20% off right now off your first order, go to mackweldon.com/fantasypros. Enter the promo code FantasyPros. Also, if you spend $75 or more, you will get a free silver mask. Again, 20% off your first order at mackweldon.com/fantasypros. Enter code FantasyPros. Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. All right, guys, so Will Fuller comes off a giant Thanksgiving performance and gets suspended 6 games for using a banned substance. We will get to the impact on the Texans playmaker shortly, but Will Fuller is a free agent after this year. Garrett, how are you thinking about him for dynasty purposes, or do we just not have enough information right now? It depends on where he lands.
That's probably the best way to go about it, is to just say we really don't have a good gauge of what his value is going to be. Is he going to be in a different uniform? Is he going to be back in Houston, which I kind of doubt at this point, but it's really difficult to know where he's going to land, how much that's going to affect his value. But the other thing that's tricky about Will Fuller is we see the ability, and his ability is incredible. But up until this season, he really hasn't been able to stay healthy, and now you have to ask the question, was the performance-enhancing stuff a factor in him being able to stay healthy this year? So there's just so many different factors and layers to Will Fuller right now that it's going to be tough to really gauge, should I buy him, should I sell him? So he's kind of more of a firm hold for me at the moment until we get more information.
How about you, Yates, from a dynasty standpoint?
Yeah, same camp there. You just got to kind of hold him because it's going to be interesting. I doubt that an NFL team is going to head into free agency with Will Fuller and say, all right, here's the, back up the Brinks truck for him, and so I think he might end up signing a 1-year deal, prove it, kind of see, okay, can you stay healthy without, like Garrett said, without this hanging over your head? Was this because of the PED? So I think it's just interesting to monitor. I don't think that we really can have any actionable advice on it right now. It's just kind of, if you've got him, hold on to him, because there is just an insanely wide range of outcomes with him this year.
All right, so now let's talk about the impact on the rest of the Texans here. The schedule was not good going forward. I mean, they had the Colts, the Bears, the Colts, then they get the Bengals in Week 16. Deshaun Watson's numbers are drastically different when Will Fuller is on the field versus not on the field. So how do you feel generally about Deshaun Watson going forward here, Garrett?
I really like Deshaun Watson. I think he's just such a fantastic player, and one of the things that I think he's improved on every year, but specifically this year, is just understanding when the right time to run is. We saw him when he was a younger player. He would take off a lot, and that's great for fantasy purposes. But for his overall game, I think he's really done a great job of standing in the pocket longer and then using his legs only when necessary. The problem is when you take away DeAndre Hopkins, which they did at the beginning of the year, and you take away Will Fuller, that makes it a little more difficult to stay in the pocket and try to look for those big plays down the field. So this definitely hurts his value. But even for fantasy purposes, take away the NFL side of things, if he does revert back to what he was doing in his first and second seasons as a rookie and second-year player, he's still valuable for fantasy football because he's going to be running around and getting all those extra yards. So I definitely still like him. And then as far as long-term dynasty value, he's easily a top 5 play for me, maybe even top 3. So I have very high expectations for Deshaun Watson moving forward. But when you look at the fantasy playoffs here between the schedule and then losing your top weapon, you definitely do have to downgrade him a little bit.
Yeah, Yates, what do you wind up doing with him for your rest of season rankings? It's hard for me to push him down too low for me. Like, he's still a starter for me and everything like that, but it definitely dings his value a bit.
It was so funny because on Monday morning, so I'll go through and I'll do the waiver wire rankings, and then I'll go through and update my rest of the season rankings. And I had literally, yesterday morning, moved Deshaun Watson up to QB2 on the entire season because I was like, this guy he's been performing at an extremely high level over the past couple of weeks. He's just been dominant. And then yesterday evening, we get the news that Will Fuller's out for the remainder of this year. So he came crashing down. He's back down at 5 for me. So I still think that absolutely, Garrett mentioned, like, if he leans back on his rushing ability because there just aren't the looks downfield that he can, be able to gun it downfield, then great. Then that means that he's going to rack up those rushing yards, which are extremely valuable for fantasy football. We know that he can do it. So I still think that, if you got Deshaun Watson, you're panicking, you're concerned a little bit, but yet at the same time, you're still plugging him into your lineup as a starter every single week.
Yeah, I do like a firm, real look at my rest of season rankings. I do update them on Monday, of course. But once we're done with our waiver wire live stream, Yates, and I start working on my next week's rankings, and I take a real closer look and I tweak them a little bit. But right now, Watson fell to 7th for me rest of season. And again, that's a guy who you're starting each and every week. But I have him behind Mahomes, Herbert, Rodgers, Wilson, Murray, and Josh Allen going forward. I just do think with the schedule and with the loss of Fuller, it's really, it's a tough one for him. And again, that just drops him to 7th. He's still a guaranteed starter. How about the other pass catchers here now, Garrett? Like, no Will Fuller. Okay. Randall Cobb is on IR. Kenny Stills is gone. So you've got Brandon Cooks, who was kind of a pretty reliable option even before that. You've got Kiki QT out there. Maybe Jordan Akins gets more involved. How do you view the value of these guys rest of season without Fuller?
Yeah, the wide receiver room got real thin real quickly there. Yeah. Obviously, Cooks has to get a nice bump. He was already starting to build a better chemistry down the stretch. With Deshaun Watson, we were seeing him get more involved just about every single week there. I think he obviously assumes that number one role. Really, then the question becomes, what do they do after that? Kuti, he's always kind of been in and out of the lineup. He's involved, he's not involved. Steven Mitchell is the third wide receiver potentially right now. He only has 2 catches on his career. Kind of a deep dart throw, and this is more of a dynasty dart throw more than a redraft, because at this point it's really just Cooks that you're willing to start in the wide receiver room. But I really like Isaiah Coulter. He's different than everybody else that they have in their wide receiver room, partly just because he's 6'2". He was their 5th round pick out of Rhode Island, a guy that I thought had really good sleeper appeal. So he's definitely a guy that I kind of want to keep tabs on. If he's on waivers, or I can pick him up for a 4th or 5th round pick in dynasty purposes, I'm willing to make that deal just to kind of see what happens down the stretch with him. But as far as the rest of the season goes, I think really the only guy you can count on is Cooks. And, we were seeing Atkins get involved more. We know Fells is still there. Farrell Brown's there. And that's the most difficult part, is now they're adding another tight end with Waring back in the mix now. And so it's just going to be really tough to trust any one of those guys. So really, as far as the pass catchers go, I think it's really just Cooks at this point for redraft.
Yates, what do you think for redraft purposes?
Yeah, for redraft purposes, it's Brandon Cooks. I moved him up to 11 in my rest of season rankings, even though they have very, very tough matchups coming up on the schedule. Where's the ball going to go? It's got to go to Brandon Cooks. So, I think Cooks is really the only one that you should be looking at. Akins does get a slight bump up, but I'm saying slight. It's not like he's moving up into the top 12 in my rest of season rankings. He's in the streaming conversation every single week, so I think he's someone to keep tabs on heading into this next week's game. But outside of that, I'm not really necessarily like jumping out of my seat to go get Akins into my starting lineup.
And again, it's a tough schedule, but is there any chance they have 2 backs who are kind of known, or at least were known at one point, for their pass catching prowess? They do not utilize that at all in terms of targets. Is there any chance you guys think, whether it's Duke Johnson, whether David Johnson returns from the concussion? I haven't seen anything on that. I think he's eligible to come back this week. That they get more involved in the passing game more, given the fact that there are no options really to throw the ball to? Or is this just like, look, if you have a Texans running back, chances are it's just, they're going to be middling, maybe flex value at best? Garrett.
Potentially, more so with Duke Johnson, because we even saw on Thanksgiving Day, they used Duke Johnson on that nice wheel route, and it was a nice deep completion that they had for a touchdown for Duke. So there might be more situations where you might see him running more pass routes out of the backfield, or maybe even lining up at the slot at times if they really need him to. But I don't know that it's enough of a bump up to say, yes, now I feel super confident with both him and David Johnson in the backfield to be able to start Duke. I don't know that I'm quite there.
How about you, Yates? Do you think that they get these guys more involved?
I mean, more being a relative term. You might see 1 or 2 more targets. It's not like they're going to start funneling the ball their way. I think what you're going to see is them just plug these guys in. Isaiah Coulter he's got speed. Like, this is a fast dude and that can stretch the field. So they're going to plug him into that Will Fuller role. Now, he's not going to produce anywhere close to the same way. And then Kiki QT will step into the slot role that he's assumed, assuming that he can stay healthy. So I think they're just going to try to plug these guys into these vacant roles now and just see what happens. But I don't think that they're going to change their offensive philosophy here.
All right, let's get into some quote-unquote league winners, and I use that term loosely, okay, because you can, you guys can, I didn't give you any guidelines for this. I was just like, hey, let's just talk about some guys who we think are going to have big finishes and can maybe lead. So, you want to talk about Derrick Henry, given the schedule? God, do whatever you want. But let's start with running back here. Who's a guy who you're looking at who could really be kind of a difference maker going forward here? I'll start with you, Garrett.
So, yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that because I actually put down multiple people because I wasn't sure. I was like, is he looking for like the top end, or
you can ask me,
a little
Garrett.
deeper?
I have an email address. You can text me, whatever you want. Yeah, whatever you want to do. Go. World is your oyster. Go.
So the main one that I went with, and this is gonna seem kind of gross at first, and you're gonna be like, why? Why would you bother picking this guy after what we've seen so far as your league winner? But I'm gonna go a little bit on the riskier side, and I'm gonna go with Jonathan Taylor. Yeah. I know that it's been frustrating this year, but we saw in his last game that he played looked much better. They were finally using him in the way that best suits his game, which is a volume running back. Let him get in rhythm, get a better feel for the game, and get downhill. And we were starting to see that be really effective despite the 1,800 holding calls that they had in a row that game. He was looking really good. Unfortunately, as soon as he got in a rhythm, of course, COVID happened, and that was really frustrating. But he has one of the lighter schedules coming up the rest of the way. He's got Tennessee, Houston, Las Vegas, Houston again, and then week 16 is going to be tough with Pittsburgh. But up until that point, he's got a relatively light schedule. So I'm on board with Jonathan Taylor. I'm not necessarily saying he's going to be this top 6 running back, but with a lighter schedule, with them trending using him more, and he's been surprisingly active in the passing game, I think he could be a really effective RB2.
Yeah, so a couple of things. Number one, this was the top name on my list too,
hey.
So you had it exactly right. Yay! But look, there are a couple of things here. Number one, what's really fun is when you record a waiver wire show and you talk about Jordan Wilkins and you analyze the way COVID-19 testing works and how there's probably a good chance that Taylor's going to have to miss another week against Houston, one of the worst teams in rush DVOA, and then it breaks right after that Taylor did not actually himself test positive. He was just a close contact, and he's going to be back playing next week. So that's one thing. Sorry to everybody who listened yesterday. That news broke after we recorded. But I really do. I mean, Houston, Las Vegas, and Houston is his next 3 games. The best schedule that you could possibly have for a running back. That's it. The 2 worst teams in rushing DVOA. And I think this last game against Tennessee was good for Taylor, right? Because Taylor looked good against Green Bay, another soft defense. He got the work for the most part. He produced for the most part. And then you have this first game without him. Nyheim Hines does not produce on the ground, as is pretty much expected if he's going to get a huge workload like that. Jordan Wilkins doesn't produce on the ground. Taylor is the guy. And given the fact that they had this game without him, it didn't go well. Now that he's back, and again, the fact that he didn't actually test positive, that's great. You don't have to worry because sometimes you see things. We think about Cam Newton Yates that you and I talked about a lot where you felt like it was probably affecting his play after he tested positive. Taylor didn't even test positive. He was just a close contact. That's why he was on the list. So you should have no ill effects. So I agree. This is the guy who, again, I don't know what fantasy managers did with him. I could see certainly some of them cutting him. So if he was available or anything like that, if you do roster him, I do feel, like this is probably the guy with the highest upside. Yates, what do you think about? You can talk about Taylor. You can talk about your pick at running back.
Yeah, Taylor was going to be one of the guys that I mentioned. So Garrett made the right points there. I mean, this is just a guy who you're looking at his schedule and you're saying, I want to start Jonathan Taylor. And assuming, too, that Jordan Wilkins, it came out maybe yesterday evening that Jordan Wilkins is pretty banged up, was how Frank Reich phrased it. So there's a possibility that Wilkins is out for this next matchup, which clears up the situation a little bit. So Derrick Henry was the guy that I was just going to mention due to his schedule. I mean, it's ridiculous. Cleveland, Jacksonville, Detroit, and Green Bay over the fantasy football playoffs. He's absolutely going to win some people fantasy championships. And then Austin Eckler was the other guy that I was going to mention, just due to him coming back and seeing the type of volume that he did for fantasy managers that held onto him in their IR spot for that long. And they were still able to, claw their way into the fantasy playoffs. I think you now have a potential league winner on your hands with Austin Eckler.
I'm really glad Derrick Henry has such the easiest schedule that you could possibly have in the fantasy playoffs because I was pretty worried about what he was going to do regardless. I mean, it's going to be unfair in the playoffs given that it doesn't matter who he plays at this point. Once you get to this point, he just dominates completely. And that playoff schedule, I mean, it's just, if you play into week 17 too, goodness, they get Houston in the final week. Right. But Jacksonville, Detroit, Green Bay, goodness gracious. I am sorry for anybody who is going up against Derrick Henry in the fantasy playoffs. I'm going to throw out a couple more names here just briefly. Cam Akers is a guy, again, he's probably available on your waiver wire. I don't really think that Cam Akers is going to, probably explode. He probably needs an injury to either Darrell Henderson or Malcolm Brown or both to really be that guy. But you did see them turn to him in the second half of this last game. He's got touchdowns in back-to-back games. New England, not a great run defense. The Jets, okay run defense, but running backs still score fantasy points. He's a guy who I think could be somebody who, if everything breaks absolutely right, you draw that inside straight, he could be somebody who makes a huge difference. And I will mention Benny Snell as well, just in case. I don't know. Again, I'm going to try to make sure I don't speak out of turn here. I don't know if Connor actually tested positive or if he's just a close contact with somebody. But remember, Connor had, do we know?
He tested positive, but they were waiting for another result to confirm that. They were waiting for back-to-back testing.
Okay, so the one thing that we have to point out in real life is that Connor obviously is a cancer survivor. That puts you at a higher risk necessarily. So, I hope James Conner is able to come back next week and play and that he's completely fine. But, guard against that just in case, given the fact that he is a higher risk person. We don't know exactly what it's going to be. That Benny Snell could be a guy. They get Buffalo, they get Cincinnati in the fantasy playoffs. So he is somebody to keep your eye on. All right, let's go to wide receiver here. Garrett, you nailed your first pick, so you're right in the right range. So go ahead, don't blow it here. This is a big one. Go ahead with your wide receiver.
Okay, lots of pressure, but I'm going to go with Robert Woods. Robert Woods has really come on strong these past couple weeks, and he's always been a guy that's been pretty consistent for your fantasy football teams. But it's another situation where we're seeing that offense overall. They've looked better the past couple weeks. San Francisco was a little bit iffy overall, but had that nice game against Tampa Bay, and the schedule looks great as well. We have Arizona and New England, which are fine. Like, you're not thrilled. They're not terrible, but in the semis and the championship, to get the New York Jets and the Seattle Seahawks as teams that you're going up against, that's a great recipe for success. They've been using him a lot. They've been targeting him a lot. They're using him even in the run game quite a bit. It seems like every week he has at least one or two rushes and using him on those end arounds and things like that. So I'm a big fan of Robert Woods, and he's not the sexy name of, the Devontae Adams and the Michael Thomases or whatever, but he always is in that conversation of that right around a wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. He just lives right there, and that's so valuable for your fantasy football team.
All right, Yates, give me a wide receiver.
Allen Robinson. You look at that schedule for the Bears coming up here. It's absolutely fantastic. Detroit, Houston, Minnesota, and Jacksonville. And Houston, they're a average pass defense, but they just lost Bradley Roby too. So That's just going to significantly open things up for opposing passing attacks. So looking at Detroit, Houston, Minnesota, and Jacksonville heading into the fantasy football playoffs, and based on 13 targets, what we saw with Mitchell Trubisky back at quarterback this past week, Allen Robinson is absolutely going to win some people fantasy championships.
All right, I'll go a little lower here and go to a guy who is probably rostered. He might be available in some leagues, and that's Allen Lazard, who obviously has missed a lot of time. He left for a bit in his last game with a hit, but he did come back. He caught the touchdown this last game, 10 targets already in his 2 games back, despite the fact that he has not yet seen the full complement of snaps. Philly, Detroit, Carolina, Tennessee, not a real imposing schedule, but it doesn't really matter when you've got Aaron Rodgers playing at the level that he is. He's sort of, I think, going to get back into that role is really, I've never had faith in MVS to become a reliable fantasy option this year. I do have faith in Allen Lazard. I do think that he's somebody who's going to be in for a big finish. And if you're relatively strong and you are like, man, if I can have a wide receiver 3 who I just know is going to give me solid points every week with the possible ceiling to go bigger, I think Lazard is the guy who I'm looking at there. All right, let's real quick go through quarterback and tight end, because at this point it kind of is what it is. And tight end, there probably is nobody, because it's just sort of like, I don't feel comfortable with any tight ends. But let's start with quarterback. Garrett, who's your quarterback who you think is going to be maybe a league winner here?
Well, I'm actually pairing up. I'm pairing up my wide receiver and my quarterback, and I'm going to go with Jared Goff. And he's one of the guys that would be attainable, because that's the difficult part is chances are if you have a high-end quarterback, you're not willing to deal him. You're not trading Mahomes. You're not trading Murray. You're not trading Aaron Rodgers. Those guys are either on your roster or they're not. if for some reason your trade deadline hasn't passed or whatever, Jared Goff could be one of those guys. I already mentioned the schedule, getting the New York Jets and then Seattle in those last 2 weeks. That's just a dream. So especially if you're able to pair up Goff with Robert Woods, that's a pretty nice duo to have right there.
All in on the Rams. How about you, Yates? What do you got for your quarterback?
I'm going to get destroyed. Okay, so in
always good to preface one of your takes with that one, Yates. Go ahead.
In 2017, weeks 14 through 16, this player was the QB1 in all of fantasy football through that stretch, and he won fantasy championships for people.
This is.
And this was Blake Bortles. With that in mind, I'm going to say that Mitchell Trubisky is going to be someone who you can plug in your fantasy playoffs that could potentially help you win a fantasy title. Again, I mentioned the schedule. Detroit in week 13, Houston, Minnesota, and Jacksonville. You look at opposing matchups for opposing quarterbacks, it doesn't get much better than that. And Trubisky, for everything that he like, a couple bonehead interceptions on Sunday Night Football, the offense looked terrible. I get it. But it looked better than what it did with Nick Foles. He still finishes the QB6 on the week. So it's not going to be pretty, but you can plug him into your lineup, and you could in those matchups, and you could potentially walk away with a fantasy title.
I mean, not sure if Trubisky's available out there for anybody to go get, but if he is, definitely look at him. The schedule is remarkable. I mean, the schedule really is about as good as you can get there for it. But yeah, you are going to get killed. Definitely on Twitter for it. But that's all right. That's what we're here for. That's why we're here, is for everybody to yell at us. I'm going to go with Fitzmagic. Again, we don't know necessarily if he's going to start rest of the season, but this does strike me as the Dolphins are currently in the playoffs. I think they know that their playoffs chances are probably a little better with Fitz in there. They have a good schedule: Cincy, KC, fine, the Patriots and the Raiders. So when Fitz is in there, he's a fantasy option. So he's my guy there. How about tight end? Who do you got, Garrett?
This is kind of more of your desperation. Oh no, my guy got hurt, and this is a guy that could fill in and give you really good production, because I think, and I don't know how many leagues he's available on the waiver wire or not, but Trey Burton has actually played really, really well lately. And it seems like around the goal line, they want to get him the football, whether they're throwing him the football or whether they're lining him up in the backfield and handing it off to him, much to the chagrin of the Jonathan Taylor owners. I think that Trey Burton has really become a reliable weapon for them in the red zone, and he has just as good of a shot as anybody else outside of those top 6 tight ends to be able to get in the end zone for your fantasy football playoffs.
How about you, Yates? Who's a tight end for you?
Burton was someone that I considered. The other guy I'll just mention briefly. Again, you mentioned, Dan, that the tight end position is gross.
Yes.
So Hunter Henry, looking at his matchups: New England, Atlanta, Las Vegas, and Denver. With the way Justin Herbert's been playing, and now he's been focusing in on Hunter Henry, I think he can help lead some teams to a fantasy title.
Yeah, Henry definitely is the guy. If you are sitting there and you have no tight end, and you're in a deeper league, and people are hoarding multiple tight ends, I might look at Jacob Hollister. Disley had more snaps yesterday. Hollister was, though, the third down guy, so he was running more routes. They get the Jets. Washington isn't that bad. Giants, Rams, or whatever against tight ends. So if you're desperate, if you're in a tight end premium league, if you're in a place where most tight ends are rostered, he's a guy who might be a desperation play. DSTs. This is when fantasy managers are asking a lot about DSTs and saying, oh, who can I stash? Who can I get for the fantasy playoffs? So who's a DST? What's a DST that you like here, Garrett, going forward?
This is one I haven't necessarily used a ton over the course of this season, but when I look at their schedule and how some of their guys have really been performing well lately, I'm intrigued by the Los Angeles Chargers. Overall in the season, they haven't been fantastic. I think they're right around the early 20s as far as overall rank for defenses. But you've got New England, which they haven't been anything special. Atlanta's a middle-of-the-road matchup, but Las Vegas is beatable, and so is Denver. So when you're looking at somebody that you might have to start every week, because we know in some of these redraft leagues, teams love to hoard some of those defenses and stash multiple ones depending on the matchups. If there's one that you're like, man, it's not perfect, but I could get away with playing them every week if I had to, I think the Los Angeles Chargers are a team you could do that with.
How about you, Yates?
That was the team I had written down too. So Garrett made all my points for me. I don't feel like I have anything to add, really.
Wonderful. That's basically what you do on most of the podcasts.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you.
I will briefly throw out a couple other names. Seattle, of course, you can see they're playing better on defense, generally speaking. Not so much for the playoffs. They do have the Giants this upcoming week, and there's not going to be any Daniel Jones. Then they get the Jets after that. After that, it's Washington and the Rams. Certainly not matchups that you necessarily fear. So I think you can roll with them. If you're in the playoffs, if you have a bye, you can look at Cleveland, who gets the Giants and the Jets in week 15 and 16. And then I will also mention Dallas, not a great defense, of course, but they do get Cincinnati, San Francisco, and Philadelphia. So that's a pretty good schedule. All right. You have both been very patient. I appreciate you. Let's talk about some dynasty here. Let's start with the rookie class that's going to be coming out. Let's see what's coming down the pike. You've got dynasty managers here thinking about how to craft their rosters going forward. So, Garrett, start us off. What are we looking at here that's coming in the rookie class at the various positions?
This is a super intriguing class because we just got off the 2020 class, which is a class that we had been hyping for a while as, the class that has the running backs. And that's what we were all excited about. And as the class grew, it was like, hey, actually, the wide receivers in that class are really, really good. And they might even be better than the running backs in that class. And this 21 class has a similar type of hype. Now, the positions are a little bit different than it was with the 2020 class, but we're looking at, first of all, one of the best quarterback classes we've seen in a while. Obviously, Trevor Lawrence is the name that everyone's already familiar with. You don't even have to care about college football, and you still probably know who he is. Justin Fields is also part of the equation. And then there's a bunch of other guys that could end up being first-round picks. Kyle Trask, Zach Wilson, we have Trey Lance. There's all kinds. Mac Jones out of Alabama. We could have as many as 6 quarterbacks go into the first round. I would be shocked to see any less than 4 for sure going inside of that first round. So should be a very good quarterback class. Wide receiver is pretty dang good as well. It's a good class. It's going to be similar to this past year. I don't know that it's going to quite be as good, but we're going to probably be looking at a similar to a 2019 class, which ended up being a very good wide receiver class. And then this is maybe the best tight end class we've had, period. There are some fantastic prospects at the tight end position. Kyle Pitts is the one that's just lighting the world on fire, but you have Pat Freiermuth out of Penn State, who is a guy that is your more traditional tight end. He can do the inline stuff. He's big. He's physical. And then you have a Brevin Jordan, who's this athletic, kind of in the mold of more of an Irv Smith type of player that can make plays out of Miami there. And then even a Charlie Kohler out of Iowa State. There's a couple other guys. So it's a really, really, really good tight end class. Then we get to the running back class, and this is where it gets interesting because overall, I don't think this is a great running back class, which is going to be difficult because I think 22 we're going to be in the same spot, if not maybe even worse. So these next 2 years are not going to be crazy strong running back classes, which only more emphasizes why I hope you're able to get some decent running backs on your team before we get to these draft classes, because it's going to be tough to add a lot of solid guys. I love Travis Etienne out of Clemson. He's the one exception to this rule for me. I think he's a fantastic player, plug-and-play guy, elite acceleration, and he's got great speed too. But when I'm talking 0 to 60 ability, I don't know that there's anybody that I've seen in recent years at the running back position be able to get from 0 to 60 so quickly, even off of breaking tackles. He just accelerates so quickly. But then after that, there's a big group that are okay. We have the Najee Harrises out of Alabama. Chuba's really fallen off this past season. We've got Williams out of UNC that's kind of ascended a little bit. Some Kylan Hill guys. And so we're looking at a lot of guys that are probably round 3 type of guys. I think Najee will go higher. I'm not as high on him personally. But it's a lot of round 3, round 4 guys. So it's going to be really tough to trust a lot of the running backs in this class like we had this past season.
Yates, you just want to co-sign everything Garrett said and been like, yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. So you can move on.
No, I think with the quarterback class, I mean, he mentioned it. Like, if you're in a Superflex Dynasty League, this is extremely exciting with these guys that you've got coming in. Yeah, he mentioned, 6 potential quarterbacks going in the first round, and there are some intriguing names down the board, too. So it's going to be really interesting if you're in the Superflex Dynasty League and you're in need of some young quarterback talent. I think this is a good year for you. The running back class, he mentioned, there's a group up at the top. You're looking at Travis Etienne, Najee Harris, Javonte Williams out of UNC. All those guys have kind of solidified themselves, but it's a question mark at number 3. Can Javonte Williams continue to ascend and solidify that spot? Wide receiver, you're looking at guys like Rashad Bateman, Rondale Moore, Jamar Chase, of course, opting out this entire year out of LSU. He's just going to be phenomenal in the NFL. He's your number 1 wide receiver. Then you have Devontae Smith, Jalen Waddle out of Alabama. Those guys are phenomenal players in their own right. Tylan Wallace, Seth Williams out of Auburn. These guys all have a chance to make significant contributions in the NFL. Then you flip over to the tight end position, like you mentioned. Pat Freiermuth, I think he had a season-ending injury, which should push him doon NFL draft boards, but he's still going to be a phenomenal pro. Kyle Pitts, I mean, just goodness gracious, this dude's a monster. And then Brevin Jordan, Charlie Colt, Jeremy Ruckert at Ohio State. There are some really, really intriguing names here moving forward in this tight end class. So again, some position groups that we normally have questions about with the quarterback and tight end positions, those are looking pretty solid heading into draft season.
So let me ask you guys something then. When you're progressing through your dynasty season, okay, and you're getting late and you're getting to the trade deadline or whatever you want to do, how much do you factor in the strength of the rookie class that's coming in at the various positions when deciding the types of trades that you're going to make? I'll start with you, Garrett.
I definitely think it's a pretty big factor to consider because you have to think a lot more like a GM because your team's not making the playoffs, your team stinks, whatever it is, and you really have to start to determine, okay, if I'm going to get rid of let's say Joe Mixon, a guy that let's maybe get somebody that would actually help a fantasy roster right now because Joe Mixon's injured. So let's say you're going to get rid of a Derrick Henry, who is a top 5 locked and loaded running back right now, absolute stud. And somebody's saying, I'm going to offer you 2 first-round picks in our 1 QB league, and you're considering, you're like, well, I don't know that I trust a lot of the running backs in this class, and I'm pretty set at receiver. And I'm not going to do that because I need to make sure that I have the position that I need in Derrick Henry. So, I can't do that. Whereas if you're saying, say it's DeAndre Hopkins, you looking at this class and you're saying, dang, I mean, I could get Rondale Moore, I could get Jalen Waddle, I could get Rashad Bateman. Yeah, give me a little more on top because I don't think 2 firsts is enough. But I think we can make a deal here. I think there's something that we can talk about. And those are the kinds of things that kind of go through your mind when you're doing these deals.
Yeah, it's anything you want to add on that front?
No, like you mentioned, it really is the running back position that comes into play a little bit more because you start to see these guys fall off a cliff, and specifically Todd Gurley, David Johnson, right? These guys who have just reached a certain point of their career where you were holding on to Mark Ingram, right? Like where you were holding on to them, you're like, all right, I think they can make some contributions for my fantasy roster this year. Oh, no, they're done. They just fall off a cliff. So if you can get to the point where you can replenish that running back group with some younger players, then it's important to know the strengths of the upcoming class.
All right, let's talk about a couple of guys from this year, at least, whose dynasty stock has either risen or fallen. Let me start with you, Yates, because I've thrown it to Garrett every time, and he's stealing all your thunder. So let's start with you. Yates, give me 1 or more players, whatever you want to do, any position is fine, who you think has seen his dynasty stock rise over the course of the year.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, the wide receiver position, we talked about him, DK Metcalf, rising from someone who was at like a low-end wide receiver 2 in my dynasty rankings. And I just mentioned the only guy I would take above him is Devontae Adams. So for him to make this ascent this season has just been phenomenal. It's crazy. They're very if you've got DK Metcalf, you're in a great spot moving forward. I really would consider him in the untradeable category, which very few players in Dynasty are in that realm. Terry McLaurin is someone who just continues to ascend. I had questions going into this year about the quarterback play. Doesn't matter. He can succeed anyway. Rookies, James Robinson, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, of course. Myles Gaskin, though, too, is someone that we need to talk about as someone who has seen he was left for dead in Dynasty leagues, and he has just seen his stock skyrocket.
Garrett, how about you? Names that have risen on your Dynasty board.
One of the biggest ones for me is Antonio Gibson, playing for the Washington football team. A guy that hardly touched the ball at all at the running back position in college, and really hardly touched the ball at all, period. But when he did, he made these massive big plays, and there were a lot of questions how quickly he could transfer into being a full-time running back, and those questions have really been answered. Each and every week, it looks like he's understanding the position better, understanding the leverage, the blocking schemes, what he's doing, after the line of scrimmage. There's just so many things that he's really improved on, and he really hasn't even been able to be used much in the passing game so far. So I think his stock has just absolutely skyrocketed. Kyle mentioned Terry McLaurin. He's one of those guys that I've absolutely loved for a while. His stock has really, really just jumped like crazy. And then a guy I'm going to mention here, he's kind of had a little bit of a roller coaster, but he's back up again as Deebo Samuel. I think everybody kind of forgot because of all the injuries how talented, how physical, how good of a football player he is. We were reminded this past week.
Yeah, I think that's a great name, actually. How about some fallers, though? Let's get there. I'll start with you, Garrett, this time. Who are a couple of guys who have fallen down your dynasty boards after the season?
It's tough because I'm not sure it's entirely his fault, but Zeke Elliott has to fall a little bit. Kyle mentioned earlier about those running backs that as they get older, you get to a little bit more nervous. We've seen as soon as Dak Prescott was gone, a lot of Zeke's production and value has really just fallen off a cliff. And so that's something you're absolutely concerned about. Another guy, a guy that I kind of had hoped better days for, and he did good against a poor Green Bay offense, and Kyle might kill me, but David Montgomery, it's tough to even know if he's going to be able to be their running back next year. My guess is they probably take a guy in the draft. So he went from a guy that was a top 3 pick in dynasty leagues to now I'm not even sure if he's going to be the starter next year.
Yates, fallers in dynasty leagues, who do you have?
At the quarterback position, I'll mention 2, Lamar Jackson and Carson Wentz. Lamar Jackson was a top 2, maybe even quarterback 1 heading into this season in dynasty startup drafts, and so he's fallen significantly with his play this year. Carson Wentz is just fallen off a cliff. Running back, I mentioned James Conner, Devin Singletary, and then the guys I mentioned, Mark Ingram, David Johnson, Todd Gurley. All those guys have taken significant hits based on their play this year. Wide receiver, Marquis Brown, has to be in this conversation as someone who people had very, very high hopes for, and he has just done nothing this season. And then at tight end, Zach Ertz. Like, goodness, I don't want to go anywhere near Zach Ertz in a dynasty league.
Yeah, great, guys. I loved it. I think Yates, you good with more dynasty talk here going forward in future?
You know it.
You know you are. All right. Well, we will definitely work on that, and it was great. Garrett, you're fantastic. This is the first time we've ever talked. You were awesome. I loved it. I appreciate you coming on. Remind everybody where they can find more of you and your work.
Absolutely, man. Thanks so much for having me. You can find all my stuff at dynastynerds.com. We have our podcast. We have a lot of our tools, our film room, so you can break down a lot of these rookies. And then on Twitter, you can find me at Dynasty Price, usually talking a little bit too much.
Well, you didn't talk too much on this episode. I really appreciate you coming on. We will be back tomorrow, as we always are, talking about our start-sit show. Even though we don't actually have the full games played, it's going to be fun. It's going to be amazing. And it's going to be the band back together there for that one. So we'll talk to you then. Until then, have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for tuning into the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel. Don't forget to tell us what you think in the comments section below. And while you're there, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons so you can stay up to date on all of our future content.